On behalf of the Patient Safety Authority, I would like to welcome you to this webinar titled Vaccines, the Safe Substitute. My name is Christine Bingman, and I will be your moderator for this program. Now I'd like to introduce our speaker for the webinar. JoAnn Adkins is a registered nurse and senior infection preventionist for the Patient Safety Authority. Ms. Adkins is board certified in infection control and epidemiology and is a fellow of the Association of Professionals in Infection Control and Epidemiology. Ms. Adkins is a 2019 recipient of APIC's Heroes of Infection Prevention Award for Education. She is a member of the Association for Professionals in Infection Control and Prevention, where she serves on the Member Services Committee, the Sigma Theta Tau International Nursing Honor Society, and the Pennsylvania Association Directors of Nursing Administration Long-Term Care. JoAnn, I will now turn the program over to you.
Thank you, Christine. Today I'm going to discuss a very important weapon or tool in our fight against disease, vaccines. Vaccines prevent diseases that can be dangerous or deadly. They greatly reduce the risk of infection by working with the body's natural defenses to safely develop immunity from disease. Vaccine development and vaccination has been said to be one of the most important discoveries in medicine that has saved millions of lives. As healthcare workers and infection preventionists, it is a tool we need to utilize and educate others on. Remember, it is much easier to prevent a disease than to treat it. So here's the objectives for today: to recognize the importance vaccination plays for everyone, describe the role in developing immunity, discuss how community or herd immunity helps prevent the spread of disease, and list 3 vaccinations important to healthcare workers. So I'm going to give you some history on vaccination. We will discuss some terminology that sometimes gets confusing, types of vaccines, and then go into why vaccination is so important. Vaccination's been at the forefront of preventative medicine for many, many years. The 2 posters you see on the screen are from the CDC archive. The little b is called Welby, and in 1963, the CDC made him the national symbol of public health. The poster on the left was used to encourage the public to receive the oral polio vaccine. And then because he was so well received, the CDC used it in a comprehensive marketing campaign. To promote the polio vaccine, they used newspapers, posters, leaflets, radio and television, and personal appearances at public health events. The first assignment was to sponsor the Sabin Type 2 oral polio vaccine, and later they used this marketing tool to help with other public health campaigns, such as hand washing, physical fitness, and injury prevention. Vaccination is a very important step in breaking the chain of transmission of infection. And I know when you have been on any of our webinars, whether I did them or another infection preventionist, we always talk about the chain of transmission because this is how diseases spread. So we'll use the measles because measles is a highly contagious disease. So the measles virus is your infectious agent, and it is, the reservoir would be the child that's actively infected with the measles. And they're coughing and they're talking, and it is an airborne spread, so it exits through their mouth and nose. Mode of transmission is airborne. The person next to them breathes in that measles virus, but because they have been vaccinated and developed immunity, they are not a susceptible host, so the chain is broken. Anytime someone is vaccinated and has formed immunity, they're no longer a susceptible host, and we no longer have transmission of that infection. There are several reasons why vaccines are important. One reason is vaccine preventable diseases have not gone away. The viruses and bacteria that cause illness and death still exist and can be passed on to those who are not protected. There are many diseases that are no longer common in this country, but global travel makes it very easy for disease to spread. And just think of the measles outbreak in Disneyland a few years ago. Another reason is vaccines help keep people healthy. CDC recommends vaccines throughout life to prevent against many infections. When you skip a vaccine, you leave yourself vulnerable to illnesses such as shingles, pneumococcal disease, influenza, hepatitis B, or HPV. Vaccines are as important as diet and exercise to overall health. They play a vital role in keeping you healthy, and they're one of the most convenient and safest preventative care measures available. Vaccination can mean the difference between life and death. Vaccine-preventable infections can be deadly. Every year in this country, prior to the COVID pandemic, approximately 50,000 adults died from vaccine-preventable diseases. Vaccines are safe. We have a very robust approval process to ensure that all licensed vaccines are safe, potential side effects are uncommon, and much less severe than the disease they were designed to prevent. The vaccine will not cause the disease they're designed to prevent. They contain either killed or weakened viruses, making it impossible to get the disease from the vaccine. Young and healthy people can get very sick, but infants and older adults are at increased risk for serious infections and complications, many times due to inefficient immune systems. Vaccine-preventable diseases can strike anyone, but getting vaccinated can help prevent the disease. Another reason why they're important is vaccine-preventable diseases are expensive. They not only have a direct impact on the person who is ill and their families, but they also carry a high price tag for society as a whole. It's estimated that the diseases caused by vaccine-preventable illness exceed $10 billion a year in this country. And just think about it. Average influenza can last from 10 to 15 days, with usually 5 or 6 missed days from work or school. And adults who get hepatitis A, on average, lose a month of work. If a person gets sick, then their family members are at risk also, if they are not immune. Right now, adults are the most common source of pertussis, or whooping cough, infection in infants, and whooping cough can be deadly for infants. If an adult is vaccinated, they protect themselves and their family, as well as people in your community who may not be able to be vaccinated. Your family and your coworkers need you. Millions of adults get sick from vaccine-preventable diseases every year, causing them to miss work or leaving them unable to care for those who depend on them, such as aging parents or children. This slide is just a timeline of vaccines and immunization. Immunization dated back to 1100 AD, when the Chinese practiced smallpox inoculation. And I will let you read down through that for yourself, but we have come very, very far in the development of our vaccines. Here's just the highlights from the past 55 years. We had the polio vaccine that was developed in 1955. And then in 1964, there was a severe epidemic in this country of rubella. And approximately 20,000 infants were born with severe birth defects due to the mother having rubella, at which point a successful rubella vaccine was developed. Approximately 2 decades ago, we averaged 20,000 cases of invasive Haemophilus influenza B annually, which in children can cause meningitis, ear infections, pneumonia. As recent as 1989 to 1991, there were more than 55,000 cases of measles, with over 120 deaths in this country. One of the biggest things is smallpox is considered eradicated worldwide. And in this country alone, disease rates from vaccine-preventable diseases have decreased by 99%. So they're a very, very efficient tool that we need to encourage people to utilize. Just a brief history lesson. These are what I consider the superstars, responsible for protection from the deadly diseases, and it's protection that we enjoy today. Edward Jenner is the person who discovered that cowpox pustules will protect people against smallpox. And he did that by testing it on a child. He used a smallpox lesion and scratched some of the drainage onto a child who had very mild symptoms, but then 10 days later was better. And a few months after that, Jenner inoculated the child with smallpox, and he did not develop any disease. Benjamin Waterhouse then took that one step further in this country because he inoculated his own son with cowpox, and then later with smallpox, which resulted in him having immunity and did not develop the need or the infection. This one I think everybody's heard of, Louis Pasteur. He is a chemist who's often regarded as the father of modern microbiology. He's made many contributions to science, but one of his biggest contributions, besides pasteurization, was he learned how to make vaccines from weakened or attenuated germs. And he developed the earliest vaccines against cholera, anthrax, and rabies. This next gentleman you may not have ever seen, but he truly is the superstar out of the bunch. He is a pioneering virologist and was the 20th century's leading vaccinologist. Maurice Hilleman is credited with developing more than 40 vaccines in his lifetime and saving millions of lives and eradicating many common childhood diseases. It is estimated his measles vaccine alone has prevented approximately 1 million deaths. And he also developed hepatitis A, measles, mumps, meningitis, hepatitis B, rubella, and Haemophilus influenza. And then the last member of my superstar team is Kizzmekia Corbett. This is the lady who was the team leader at National Institute of Health that developed the mRNA-based COVID-19 vaccines. She and her team, in a span of less than a year, were able to develop a safe and effective vaccine to protect against COVID-19. So I thought she was worth a shout out. I want to go through just some of the common vaccine preventable diseases and mainly the complications they can cause. And the reason I'm doing that is you may work with staff or you may have family members who are very vaccine hesitant for any type of vaccine. And I want to try to provide you with some knowledge that you may be able to use to provide education to those people. First is measles. Measles is an acute viral infection, and it is still a common and often a fatal disease in developing countries. World Health Organization estimates that there were more than 20 million cases and over 240,000 deaths from measles in 2006. We saw a resurgence of measles in this country in 1989 and then again 3 years ago due to decreased vaccination rates. The outbreak that occurred at Disneyland, people came from overseas in an area where measles were endemic and brought it with them. They were not vaccinated, but then there were susceptible people at Disneyland in California who did not believe in vaccination, who then developed the measles. The issue with measles is 30% of the cases have one or more severe complications. The complications may be less severe, such as otitis media or diarrhea, or they may be very severe, and you could have a complication of pneumonia, encephalitis, and seizuring. And measles itself does carry a mortality rate of 0.2% in all cases. The mumps. The mumps themselves make the people who have them very miserable. They will get severe inflammation and swelling of their parotid glands in their neck, which usually is the classic sign, as you can see in the child in the picture. But the complications with the mumps are, the big one is central nervous system involvement. Approximately 15% of the cases develop aseptic meningitis. And deafness can occur in these cases. If the patient with the mumps develops deafness, it is a sudden onset and it is permanent. The average death rate in this country from the mumps up until 1999 was about 1 per year, but the complication rate was much higher. Rubella. Rubella is similar to the other measles, carries the nasty rash for 14 days after exposure, but the main objective of rubella and why the vaccine was developed was to prevent congenital rubella syndrome. In adults who develop rubella, they may develop arthritis, thrombocytopenia, encephalitis, orchitis, or neuritis. But the biggest issue is the congenital rubella syndrome. As I mentioned before, we had an epidemic in 1964 to 1965 in this country that resulted in 12.5 million cases of rubella. And this was before we had a vaccine. Of those cases, 2,000 of those newborns developed encephalitis. There were over 11,000 spontaneous abortions, 2,100 neonatal deaths, and 20,000 newborns that had the chronic rubella or the congenital rubella syndrome. Of those 20,000, 11,000 were deaf and 4,000 were blind, which is why the effort to develop a vaccine against that. For the newborns that have the congenital rubella syndrome, deafness is the most common complication, followed by eye defects, heart defects, microcephaly, mental retardation, and liver and spleen damage. Tetanus. This is an infection that the bacteria invades your body, but then it produces a toxin, and that's what causes the severe muscle contractions. It was referred to many times as lockjaw because the first muscles that would spasm were the neck and jaw muscles, making it very hard for the patient to open their mouth or to swallow. Tetanus is different from the other vaccine preventable diseases because it does not spread person to person. This bacteria is a spore-forming bacteria, and those spores are usually found in soil, dust, and manure. When those spores enter your body, they develop into the bacteria, and it usually enters through breaks in the skin. Tetanus is uncommon today in this country. We average about 30 to 40 cases every year, but those cases, almost 99% of them are in people who were not vaccinated against tetanus. They may have never been vaccinated, or they don't stay up to date, and it is recommended that you are vaccinated every 10 years. You get a booster for tetanus. Another vaccine preventable disease is diphtheria. It's an acute bacterial disease that also produces a toxin. The problem with this toxin is it causes and develops a pseudomembrane within 2 to 3 days of illness that lines the mucus of your respiratory tract over the tonsils, the pharynx, the larynx, and can extend into the trachea. This can result in a fatal airway obstruction. And other complications is people may also develop cutaneous diphtheria. It does carry a fairly significant mortality rate of 5 to 10%, but in people younger than 5 or older than 40, that rate can go as high as 25%. And this is just brief information on how it is transmitted and what the treatment is. Pertussis. One thing that is nice is we have the opportunity that our tetanus, pertussis, and diphtheria is all combined in one injection if people take all three. But pertussis is an extremely contagious respiratory infection. It also produces toxins. This bacteria attaches to the cilia, the respiratory system, and then that toxin paralyzes that cilia and causes inflammation, which interferes with the cleaning of secretions. And if you've ever heard someone with pertussis, you think that their lungs are being coughed up. The big issue with pertussis is we cannot vaccinate newborns against pertussis. So we need to protect them, and that's why it is recommended that pregnant people, their significant other, and any other family members that will be around that infant be vaccinated against pertussis to prevent that infant from being infected. The biggest cause of death in those infants is pneumonia. Varicella. When you get the varicella, it usually is a primary infection is a chickenpox, but secondary infection is a shingles. The complication from the chickenpox, and people will many times say, oh, that's just one of those childhood annoyance diseases. There can be some pretty significant complications with chickenpox. People can develop severe bacterial infections of their skin with either staphylococcus or invasive group A strep, causing serious illness or death. They may develop pneumonia, or you may have central nervous system manifestations such as aseptic meningitis or encephalitis. Meningococcal disease. This is the severe illness caused by Neisseria meningis. It is the leading cause of meningitis, bacterial meningitis, and sepsis, and it does carry a very significant mortality rate of 12%. Humans are the only natural reservoir of meningococcus. We are not receiving it or transmitted from any other animal or mammal type. We are the only known reservoir. I know you're all gearing up in spite of COVID for influenza season within your facilities. And just to briefly touch on influenza, it's one of the most common infections of man, birds, and mammals, and it is one of the 10 leading causes of death in this country when complicated by pneumonia. Here are your high-risk populations: young children, elderly, people with chronic medical conditions, pregnant women, children 6 months to 18 who are receiving long-term aspirin therapy, morbidly obese, residents of nursing home or chronic care facilities, American Indians or Alaskan Natives, household contacts of children younger than 5 or adults older than 50, or caregivers of high-risk people, and healthcare workers. Pneumococcal disease. And we're talking about pneumococcal disease that's caused by Streptococcus pneumoniae. It is it's an acute bacterial infection. It's a leading cause of acute otitis media in children and meningitis. In adults, it mainly presents as pneumonia. Pneumococcal disease carries some significant mortality rates also. Pneumonia caused by pneumococcal disease in this country is estimated to cause 175,000 hospitalizations annually. It causes 36% of the adult community-acquired pneumonia and 50% of adult healthcare-acquired pneumonia. Mortality rate for any adult that develops pneumococcal pneumonia is 5 to 7%, but in the elderly, that rate goes much higher and can go as high as 20%. Bacteremia caused by pneumococcal disease, there are more than 50,000 cases in this country each year, carrying a mortality rate among everybody of 20%, but in the elderly is a mortality rate of 60%. And meningitis caused by pneumococcal disease carries a mortality rate of 30 to 80%. People that have cochlear implants are at increased risk for developing pneumococcal meningitis, which is why it is very important and also one of the regulations that we offer the pneumococcal vaccine to the elderly, anyone over 65 in the long-term care facilities and hospitals. Hepatitis B. I would strongly encourage you as a healthcare worker, if you have not been vaccinated for hepatitis B, to please get vaccinated. People who become infected with hepatitis B are at risk of cirrhosis, liver failure, liver cancer, and death. It's transmitted by a bloodborne pathogen, and it can cause a serious liver infection. Some people, that infection becomes chronic, and that really increases the risk of liver failure, cancer, and death. There is a very effective vaccine to prevent it. And it is estimated that approximately 880,000 people in this country have chronic hepatitis B. COVID-19. I know all of you are well versed in COVID-19, so I just want to reiterate the effectiveness of the vaccine. All COVID-19 vaccines available in the U.S. are effective at preventing COVID as seen in the clinical trials, and we are seeing that now playing out real time with the Delta variant. They offer similar protection in real world conditions, and it is an important tool to help stop this pandemic. The vaccination helps protect people from getting severely ill with COVID-19. And to receive the most protection, you need to receive all recommended doses. We have 3 vaccines that are approved. 2 are mRNA vaccines. The Pfizer vaccine is considered to be 95% effective at preventing COVID-19 virus with symptoms, and that's 2 doses 21 days apart. The Moderna vaccine is considered to be 94% effective at preventing COVID-19 virus with symptoms, and that is 2 doses 28 days apart. And then we have the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, which is not mRNA, it is a vector vaccine, similar to how we make influenza vaccines. It also has effectiveness in preventing COVID with severe illness. That one only requires 1 dose to be used. I know that there are some facilities that have gone mandatory vaccine for COVID vaccine, and there are also facilities that are mandatory influenza. For those who are not mandatory, please, please, please encourage your staff to be vaccinated. We are seeing what is playing out right now in the real world, that the Delta variant is causing illness, hospitalization, and deaths, but the majority of the people who become very ill and need to be hospitalized or death have not been vaccinated. So please encourage your staff and your family members to be vaccinated if they are not. I want to define the terms because sometimes they're used interchangeably or inaccurately. So just to give you an idea, we're going to go through some of the more common terms when it comes to vaccines. Immunity is protection from an infectious disease that is achieved through the presence of antibodies to that disease in a person's system. If immune, the person can be exposed to the disease without becoming severely infected. Active immunity. Exposure to a disease organism triggers your immune system to produce antibodies to that disease. This occurs through natural immunity or vaccine-induced immunity. It is long-lasting and sometimes may be lifelong for certain vaccines. Passive immunity, the person is given antibodies to the disease rather than producing them. Examples of this are a newborn baby acquires passive immunity from its mother through the placenta, or a person is given antibody-containing blood products, which we're seeing with COVID-19. Natural immunity is protection that results from exposure to the disease organism through infection with the actual disease. Vaccine-induced immunity is protection that results from the introduction of a killed or weakened form of the disease organism through vaccination. Immunologic memory, this is the ability of the immune system to react quickly and rapidly to an antigen the body has previously encountered and to initiate a corresponding immune response. A vaccine is a product that stimulates a person's immune system to produce immunity to a specific disease, protecting the person from that disease. Vaccination is the act of introducing a vaccine into the body. Immunization is the process by which a person becomes protected against a disease through vaccination. And then inoculation is introduction of the infectious agent onto abraded or absorptive skin surfaces. We currently have 28 vaccine-preventable diseases, but there are many more in the pipeline being developed, including a vaccine for Zika. So this slide just lists the current 28 vaccine-preventable diseases. So people may ask you, why do I need to be vaccinated? This slide just reinforces some of the complications that are associated with childhood vaccine-preventable diseases. We previously reviewed them, but I want you just to read down through there because many times it's not just like with measles, an ear infection. It can be encephalitis, seizures, and death.
But what I was saying is there are severe complications with these vaccine-preventable diseases. So this may be something you want to share and provide education on for people who are vaccine hesitant. This slide is just two illustrations that we came up with here at the Authority, just to it's a quick visual of how the vaccines work. And you can copy these and print them out. You know, all of our stuff is shared governance to use it for educational purposes. The first one on the left is showing just how any vaccine would work. A weakened or dead form of the disease is injected into the body. You make antibodies to fight against that disease germ. And then your body develops a game plan on how to fight this germ if it ever shows up again. So if you do get the actual disease, your immunological memory remembers that disease and can quickly start making antibodies. The slide on the right just gives some information on the mRNA vaccines because they are the newest. But to truly understand how vaccines work, I'm going to take you back to your AMP and your microbiology to remember how your body fights illness. When a bacteria or virus invades the body, it attacks and they start to multiply within your body. This is what the infection is, and the infection causes the illness. But your immune system has several tools to help fight infection. Blood contains red blood cells that will carry additional oxygen to tissues and organs, and it also contains white cells for fighting infection. And these white cells, the three main ones we talk about are macrophages, B lymphocytes, and T lymphocytes. Macrophages are the white cells that they actually engulf the germs, plus dead and dying cells. But they leave behind parts of those germs called antigens, and your body identifies those antigens as dangerous, and that's what stimulates your immune system to produce antibodies. The B lymphocytes actually produce those antibodies that are left behind by the macrophages. And the T lymphocytes then take it one step further because they attack the cells in the body that are already infected. Remember that anytime you encounter a germ, it takes several days to make and use all the tools needed to get over that infection. But after that infection, the immune system remembers what was learned and how to protect the body against that disease. Some of the T lymphocytes, called memory cells, go into action quickly if you encounter the same germ again. When familiar antigens are detected, B lymphocytes then go into action to produce antibodies to attack it. So that was your AMP in a nutshell. This illustration shows what herd immunity is and why vaccination is important in preventing the spread of disease. The top box shows on the left that we have the community, and the two people in red are actively infected with disease. Because no one has been vaccinated within a short period of time, on the right-hand side of the first top box, most of the community becomes ill. In the second box, we have a portion of the community, a few people, the yellow ones, who have been vaccinated, so that when we have two actively infected people, we still have transmission and spread, but we have a number of the community, because they have immunity, that do not, and have been vaccinated, that do not become ill. So there is less impact on the community. The bottom box is showing that the majority has been vaccinated. Most of the population has been vaccinated and has immunity, so that when we have those few individuals that are actively infected, it really does not impact or spread within the community, because you can see in the bottom box, when most of the community is protected, only one additional person in that community developed the disease. If the majority is immunized against a contagious disease, it greatly reduces the chance of an outbreak. This protects people unable to be vaccinated because we have contained the spread of the disease. This is called herd immunity or community immunity. This slide just lists the different types of vaccines. An activated vaccine is dead virus. It contains virus particles or bacterial or other pathogens that have been killed. Live attenuated virus contains live virus, but it has been weakened, so it will not cause acute infection. But what you have to remember is, because they contain a small amount of weakened live virus, people with weak immune systems or organ transplants need to be cautious about receiving this type of vaccine and should discuss that with their provider. Recombinant vaccine contains a certain gene from the wild type of virus, and they combine that with portions of another virus to grow, and they use protein then to harvest and make the vaccine. Conjugate vaccine or subunit vaccine has just pieces of the pathogen we're targeting, such as the shell. And they also combine that with a protein to cause the immune response. Adjuvanted vaccine, they add additional ingredients to create a stronger immune response within the person's body. Toxoid vaccine uses a toxin produced by the pathogen to create immunity to that toxin. And we use that toxin instead of the actual pathogen. And then the newest vaccine is the messenger RNA vaccines. What they do is they teach the body's cells how to make a protein that will cause an immune response to produce antibodies against that pathogen. So I'm sure all of you, when you're trying to get patients, residents, family members, staff vaccinated for many different vaccines, you have heard a lot of misconceptions, and I call them the elephant in the room. One of the biggest ones I have heard, and I'm sure many of you had, when it comes to childhood vaccinations, is that they will cause autism. That has been disproven many times over. There was one extremely small study done by a doctor in England who was paid by a lawyer group. He did this study on 8 children at his daughter's birthday party, and then published the study on the autism link. He has since lost his license, been arrested, and there has been many, many, many studies done to prove that childhood vaccines do not cause autism. Another one we hear now with the mRNA vaccines is that it will alter the DNA within someone's body and they can't have children. We are human and we have DNA within our cells, not RNA. RNA is found in viruses. The messenger RNA COVID vaccine does not interact or affect the recipient's DNA because that mRNA does not enter the cell nucleus where the DNA is held within our cells. You may hear people say, I want the actual disease for better immunity. There are too many complications that go with getting the actual disease and the infection that follows to take that risk. And then you will many times have people say the flu vaccine gave them the flu. Flu vaccines are dead virus or very weakened live attenuated virus. They will not give you the flu, but it takes at least 2 weeks to develop immunity. So there is the chance that if you got a flu shot within that time and got sick within a day or two after the shot, you had already been exposed and your body had not yet had the chance to build immunity. I just want to point this out, natural immunity versus vaccine-induced immunity. The active immunity produced by the vaccine and the immunity and immunological memory is very similar to natural infection, but without the risk of the disease. Just say no to chickenpox parties. And the reason I'm bringing that up is I remember the chickenpox parties. I unfortunately had a relative that if somebody's child had the chickenpox, she would take her children over to be infected before they reach school age, which is very scary because most children with the chickenpox may end up with some small scars from where the pox marks were, but there are very severe complications that can go along with the chickenpox. And I do know of 2 cases where the toddlers carried Streptococcus A on their skin and ended up with extremely severe strep A infections, which is flesh-eating bacteria, which led to severe surgeries to remove the infected areas and disabilities and disfigurement. Other than chickenpox parties, measles can cause blindness. We went through the many disabilities and complications that may go with some of these diseases. Vaccine safety. Vaccines are extensively tested for safety, but it's also important as healthcare providers that we pre-screen the people we're going to give that vaccine to look for potential problems. Look at your patient's residents. Have they ever had a severe reaction after a dose of vaccine or an allergic reaction? Do they have a history of having Guillain-Barré in the past? If somebody is moderately or severely ill, it may be wise to wait until they have recovered before receiving the vaccine. One thing I can tell you is we have an egg-free influenza vaccine available. So people with a severe egg allergy can now be vaccinated. There is an egg-free vaccine available. I know that used to be one of the reasons that they did not get flu vaccine, but they have since developed an egg-free vaccine, so those people can also be vaccinated. Vaccines can cause side effects. The most common is the mild reaction. They may get soreness, redness, pain at the injection site. Having raised 6 kids, we will see fainting with adolescents. In my 6, I never saw it, but I do have 2 very drama queens that I could see maybe being the fainters. But that has been seen in adolescents. Patients may complain of headaches or muscle aches. They may have fever. They may have nausea. Most of these mild reactions are not an allergy. They are not an allergy to the vaccine. That is your body recognizing the virus. Your immune system is working to produce those antibodies. There are people that have developed Guillain-Barré syndrome after a vaccination. And Guillain-Barré is a disorder of the immune system that attacks the peripheral nervous system. If someone has been vaccinated and develops Guillain-Barré, it usually occurs a few days or weeks after they have had some type of viral infection. There is an increased risk of approximately 1 case of Guillain-Barré for each 100,000 people who get a flu vaccine, so it's very minor. What we worry about more with vaccine side effects are the severe reactions, the anaphylactic reactions. They are very rare, but if they do occur, it usually happens within a few minutes to a few hours after that injection, which is why it is always wise to monitor people for 20 to 30 minutes after they have been received a vaccine to make sure they are not going to have a severe allergic reaction. If somebody does have a reaction, then it gets reported into the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System, or the VAERS system. This is a surveillance system that's run by the Food and Drug Administration and the CDC. This safety surveillance program analyzes and collects data of reports of adverse events and helps them to identify possible signs or new safety concerns. This data is analyzed by the CDC and the FDA. Most of the reports, approximately 85 to 90%, are mild events such as fever or local reactions at the injection site, but the remaining 10 to 15% are serious events involving life-threatening conditions, hospitalization, and sometimes permanent disability or death, which may or may not have been caused by an immunization. This system does work. Anyone can report into this system, and we saw this in April with the Johnson & Johnson COVID vaccine when they identified the women out of all the million people who received that vaccine who got cardiovascular issues within a very short period of time. At that point in time, that vaccine use was put on hold till further investigation could be done. So that system does work, and like I said, anyone can report into it. For all of my nurse friends out there, the American Nurses Association updated their vaccine position June 29th of this year, and they have made it very succinct. This is a statement on there. They believe it is imperative for everyone to receive immunizations for vaccine preventable diseases, as vaccines are critical to infectious disease prevention and control. But the last statement, nurses have a professional and ethical obligation to model the same healthcare standards they prescribe for their patients. The link at the bottom will allow you to pull up the entire statement and the history behind it. Also, the American Academy of Nursing issued a vaccination position statement in response to COVID-19, April 30th of 2020, and they are strongly recommending nurses protect themselves and their patients by following the recommended vaccine schedule for healthcare professionals. And then the last one is from the American Association of Critical Care Nurses. They're calling for all healthcare members and long-term care employers to require every member of the team, employees, and all contracted and credentialed providers to be vaccinated against COVID-19. And there's also a link there if you want to read more about that. So as healthcare workers, what are considered important vaccinations beside influenza and COVID-19? Hepatitis B, measles, mumps, and rubella, tetanus, diphtheria, and pertussis, varicella. You need a flu vaccine every year. It's been well documented unvaccinated healthcare personnel spread influenza to residents in long-term care facilities and are a key cause of influenza outbreaks. Hepatitis B infection, we discussed how that can lead to chronic infection and liver damage, cancer, and death. And hepatitis B vaccine protects nearly everyone who is in contact with blood, body fluids, or use needles. So if you have not, as a healthcare worker, been vaccinated against hepatitis B, talk to your employer. Measles, mumps, rubella, if you're not already immune, get vaccinated, because if you would have mild rubella disease or even have asymptomatic rubella disease, you could spread that to a non-vaccinated pregnant woman and cause rubella syndrome. Tetanus, diphtheria, pertussis, you need to be boosted every 10 years. If you get injured or have direct patient contact, make sure you have had a booster. And it's very important for pregnant women, significant others, and grandparents to protect newborns from pertussis. Chickenpox, varicella can be transmitted in hospitals by patients, staff, and visitors. If you're not already immune, get vaccinated. And COVID with the new variants, such as the Delta one we're seeing, it is imperative to vaccinate to decrease the chances of symptoms and transmission. So I decided to give you some education with these last slides. These are my top 10 reasons to get vaccinated that you may want to share with coworkers or patients or residents. Reason number 10, stay healthy and protected. You want to do everything possible to keep people healthy and protected from preventable diseases, and vaccination is the best way to do that. Prevent serious illness and complication. Vaccination protects against the complications of the vaccine preventable diseases, as we've discussed previously. Number 8, minimize the threat of vaccine preventable diseases that can result in hospitalizations and deaths every year. Number 7 reason, protect yourself while traveling. Vaccination has led to a dramatic decline of illness in this country, but if you are traveling to a country where some of those diseases, such as measles, may be endemic and you are not vaccinated, you could easily become ill with the measles or some other disease. Number 6, prevent outbreaks. Outbreaks occur when we lose our herd immunity, as was seen on that slide. So prevent outbreaks, get vaccinated. Number 5 reason, vaccination is safe and effective. All vaccines undergo a careful review by scientists, physicians, and the government to make sure they're safe. Number 4 reasons is they're recommended by the experts. The American Academy of Pediatrics, the American Academy of Family Physicians, and the CDC all strongly support vaccines. Number 3 reason, vaccination protects your loved ones. Protect the ones you care about, including family members, friends, and grandparents, so you don't spread a vaccine preventable disease. Number 2, protect those who can't be vaccinated. If someone is not vaccinated, they can easily spread the disease to other people who are unable to be vaccinated, such as infants with pertussis who are too young to receive the vaccine, or people allergic to vaccine components. And the number 1 reason, as healthcare workers, we have a public health commitment to protect. We have a commitment to our communities to protect each other by vaccinating ourselves and our family members. So here's your takeaways. Be a superhero. Promote vaccination. It's imperative to personal and public health. Remember, it is much easier to prevent a disease than to treat that disease or its complications. And I just want to close with the WHO definition of infection prevention. They define infection prevention as to ensure the protection of those who might be vulnerable to acquiring an infection, both in the general community and while receiving care due to health problems in a range of settings. I like this definition because it reminds us that everyone is responsible for infection prevention and preventing the spread of disease in all settings. Vaccination of yourself and others is a major part of prevention. Remember, I'm going to reiterate it one more time. It is much easier to prevent a disease than to treat it. This slide is just some resources. Oh, there they are. This slide is resources for you, links to resources that you may find valuable when you're doing education. And I know we only have a few minutes left, so I will take some questions. But if there's other questions that we don't get a chance to answer, I will do a frequently asked questions sheet. I'll do an FAQ and have Shelley distribute that to the attendees. So Christine, I'm going to turn this back over to you.
Thank you, JoAnn. That concludes the slide presentation portion of our program. Now we would like to begin our question and answer period. So JoAnn, the first question, if vaccines cause immunity against illnesses, why do we need to get a flu vaccine yearly and boosters for other vaccines like tetanus?
Well, there are 4 reasons that you receive more than one dose of vaccine. For some vaccine, the first dose does not provide total immunity. So more than one dose is needed to build complete immunity. One of those vaccines is bacterial Haemophilus influenza that causes meningitis in children. They need a scheduled set of doses. Other vaccines, immunity begins to wane after a period of time, and at that point in time, a booster is needed to bring your immunity level back up, such as what we see with the Tdap vaccine, the diphtheria, tetanus, and pertussis. Children receive an initial series of 4 shots, but then after those initial 4 shots, boosters are given at a scheduled time frame to keep immunity level high. For some vaccines, more than one dose is needed for the best immune response. For example, one dose of MMR, you may not develop enough antibodies to fight off the measles, but the second dose helps ensure that you're protected. And in the case of influenza, you get 1 dose per year because we have so many different influenza viruses that circulate, and they may be different year to year, and because it's a virus, it easily mutates. You need to get an influenza vaccine yearly to protect.
Thank you, JoAnn. We have another question. Why should we build herd immunity through vaccines rather than just letting people get infected?
The main reason we say to build the herd immunity is because of the complications that occur from the actual infection. When you get the naturally acquired infection, you can get severe complications, or they can even be deadly. And that's true for diseases many people consider mild, like chickenpox. It's impossible to predict who will have a mild infection and who will have a serious infection that could lead to complications, hospitalization, and death. So it is much more safe to be immunized with a vaccine and develop the immunity as to roll the dice and play roulette with the actual infection.
Very good. Thank you. I want to thank everyone for joining us today. Thank you, and this concludes our webinar.